Welcome to another segment of Market Overdrive. I am your host, Carla Mina, Coldwell Banker with Coldwell Banker. How are you, Javier?
I'm doing good. I'm Javier Garcia with the Federal Savings Bank, NMLS 217343. How's everyone doing today?
Doing great.
It's a great
Beautiful day out there.
It's a beautiful day. It's nice and sunny. Driving into the city was definitely worth the view.
Finally, we get to wear a Daisy Dukes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm wearing my Daisy Dukes.
You're wearing your Daisy
Mo,
Dukes.
you got your Daisy Dukes?
Let's go ahead and introduce our guest this morning, Javier.
Absolutely. So today we actually got a couple guests here that are going to go over a couple information in regards to tenant laws and, things like that. So with Datka Law Group, we got Mo Datka.
Hi, I'm Mo Dotka with the Dotka Law Group and Main Street Real Estate Group.
We forget that you're also a realtor.
I am.
A little bit of everything.
So you're broker owner of Main Street.
I am. Some people think of me as a realtor, some people as an attorney, and most of those people don't know I'm also the other thing as well.
You're everything.
He's
I
a little
love
bit
it.
of
So
everything.
you were originally an attorney, and then you decided to get your real estate license and then open up your brokerage, correct?
I did. I got out of law school in 2009, so job offers were tough in 2009. So I actually got a real estate license to make ends meet, and then one thing led to another. And got a
So
real
you went
estate
boss.
office.
You couldn't get a job from another boss, so you became a boss.
I did.
Love it. Good play in life. And let's introduce Lauren, who's here to school us and give us some truth on what it's like to manage properties.
Yeah, so my name is Lauren Hunman. I'm a property manager and general manager of Owl Management. And I have a pretty similar story, actually. I started off working for a developer, and in about 2010, that developer went under and decided to get into the property management world. And everyone thinks I'm a little bit crazy for doing that, but I love it. I love the craziness.
Property management. I love how we teased it on social media. So we were like, okay, so you're going through these applications or, you're going through your app and you forgot to swipe left, right? And you accepted this crazy person. And sometimes tenants know more about the tenant landlord ordinance than we do or the landlords do. So today we decided to talk about this. And it's not that we're like biased on Market Overdrive, right? Because we're always like saying no to renting. And then, like now we're saying bad tenants. But I think it's very important for people as they start looking at how much wealth you can accrue with being a landlord that you at least know your rights, because you can get in a really, really bad situation if you don't screen your tenants, correct? So why don't we just go ahead and dive right into it, since, we need to get out and go out there and sell some real estate. Why don't we start with our first topic, which should be tenant screening. You want to start with that, Lauren?
Sure, yeah. And generally, as Carlos said, knowledge is power when you're a landlord and you're an investor. You never want to be in a situation where your tenant knows more about the law than you do. The more you can know about, your local ordinances, here it's the Chicago Landlord Tenant Ordinance, the better off you are with tenants. And also knowing as much as you can about a tenant before you accept them as a tenant. So screening is super important. And a lot of people, they meet someone on site, they're doing it themselves, and they're like, oh, they seem really nice. This is going to work out great. And they don't actually do a credit check or a background check. And that's the tenant who ends up playing the system, and they lose $10,000 because that tenant stops paying rent and they can't evict them. So we're really big. We do credit checks. We do background checks. We check landlord references. We verify employment. So you're getting, pay stubs or a letter of employment if it's a new job for someone, and doing a very thorough check on any tenants before they come in. And the other thing that's important is, not just so you did all these checks and their credit's like 500, but you're like, oh, they seemed really nice on site. I'm going to take them anyways. Don't do it.
I love them. They were so sweet. They're going through like a really terrible situation. Now they need to move. Why don't you house them? And it's like, this is not a soup kitchen, not to be rude, but it's an investment, right? Because you're still being held responsible or liable by your mortgage company. You have to pay that mortgage. And if that tenant doesn't pay you rent, then you're kind of, in a bad situation. Mo, what do you advise to people who are looking to, become landlords?
Exactly what Lauren said. They were a nice person thing pops up all the time. Every time we get somebody calling who says, hey, I got a tenant who's not paying, or who's giving me a hard time, I'll always ask them, did you do a credit check? Did you do a background check? Because even if we go through the whole process, and we'll get into it a little bit later, if we go through the whole process and we win and we get a judgment, so we win a judgment, that judgment's worth the sheet of paper it's printed on. A judgment is just a sheet of paper that says you won X amount of dollars if you can't collect on that judgment. So you have to know who your tenant is. And a lot of times when we run into these situations where somebody's having an issue with their tenant, they didn't do a background check, they didn't do a credit check, and they say, hey, they were just a really nice guy and I took them up front because they were a nice guy. Move along 6-7 months and they're not so much of a nice guy anymore and you're in a landlord-tenant dispute. So definitely mitigating those problems up front makes a huge difference. And hiring somebody who knows what they're doing, like a Lauren, who can take a look at a tenant and let you know they're a safe tenant or as safe as they can be to occupy your premises.
That's great information.
Like
Thank
that.
you. Do you have any experience with being a landlord?
Yeah,
Javier?
I do actually. I probably one of the main things that I always recommend, obviously as a lender, we always look at qualifying ratios for when anytime someone's looking to buy. So number one, credit is definitely the number one priority that I always tell everyone. They have to screen the person's first credit. I always say that you also want to have some form of a reference in regards to the previous rental history, because in certain cases you might have someone who maybe doesn't make their payment until the 15th of the month or the 20th of the month. You want to get some form of landlord verification or some form of a reference, so that way you can at least verify that they are on paying their rent on time and everything else. And then I probably would say the third thing that people should also consider is the kind of renters that they want to have in their property as well. In certain cases, you might be desperate for a renter, and if you take on maybe 3 college kids that are all going to be rooming together, well, you're going to have 3 college kids living in that property. Maybe they do pan out with credit and background check and everything else, but now you got 3 frat boys that are going to be living in the property, and now you're going to have to deal with that frat boy lifestyle. So you also have to consider.
Discriminate on that. Can you discriminate on that, Lauren? You can't just say, I don't want frat boys.
Well, you also have to consider who
discriminate
you
on no
have.
credit. You can say you don't want people with no credit,
Yeah.
which oftentimes eliminates college
I was like,
students.
leave it
Right,
to
so
Javier to
eliminate
take it where
college
we
students.
can't do that.
No, well, it's just one of those situations where
you
it's
have to
like
take into
it's the
consideration
expectations.
the
You also
wear
have
and
to take
tear of the
into your
property.
other tenants, though. Maybe let's say you have a 3-unit property or 4-unit
Okay.
property, and you have 2 families in 2 of those units, and then all of a sudden you put like that badge, black sheep of a tenant or something in the property. You also have to consider that. So it's always about, do you align in regards to personalities and everything else, because you are going to be dealing with these people. They're cohabitating the property that you own. So background check, employment history, references in regards to previous rental history with previous landlords, and then just making sure that that personality trait and everything else lines up as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's where Lauren and Mo, this is where you guys come in with a lot of like the litigation issues of it, or, ethics, discrimination issues. If there's like a really fine line when it comes to practicing real estate, right? As real estate professionals, we are governed by more guidelines that you would be, because this is your property and you own it. But you still need to be very careful with, discrimination issues. Like you can't discriminate with families with children. And you can't say, I can't take somebody just because they have too many kids, and that's going to be more wear and tear on the property. Or like Javier said, frat boys. You have to have the same guidelines for everybody, and applies for everybody. And then you have to base your application on credit score, just like a lender would, right? So when you're underwriting a loan, you're looking at debt to income ratios, and you're looking at that credit score, because that's going to be a great indicator of whether this person's going to repay you. And at the end of the day, this is a business for you. So you want to make sure that you're able to collect those rents and that you're able to maintain that relationship long term. I always collect also previous landlord verifications, and that's it goes a long way to have a conversation with that previous landlord, find out if that person paid the rent on time, if you got a lot of issues with noise because they were disrespectful to someone else. And again, run it as a business. I always issue a landlord like a handbook for the tenant. So we call it a tenant handbook, which stipulates the guidelines, right? Rent is due on the first of the month, whether you're here or abroad. You need to make sure that you carry renter's insurance, and so you indicate how the relationship is going to go, so there's no questions during the process. Because again, this is a long-term relationship, a year or 2 years from some people, and it's really difficult to get out of it, to get out that contract. So you got to make sure that you stipulate everything up front. What do you think? Do you agree with that, Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, our lease is one of the longest I've ever seen, actually. We're really big on that and setting expectations.
It's like a closing
up front.
statement.
Yeah. So our lease has everything from, if you're smoking in the unit, this is what happens. If you don't pick up after your dog, this is what happens. To really try to set those expectations and have fines in place. So that you can actually penalize a tenant if they don't pick up after their dog, or if they are smoking in the unit and they shouldn't be, so that you have some options to kind of control the situation other than just going straight to eviction. Not to take business away from you, but
Unfortunately, today it's all about taking business away from Mo. You don't want it to get to Mo, right?
We don't want to have to go through an eviction process.
I know, it's painful.
Almost every client that calls us about an eviction situation, we urge them to conflict resolve before we have to get there. And that's really important to know, because if I go through an eviction process and I have a landlord who's done everything right, and there's no Chicago RLTO violation at all, which would make things a lot more difficult. But let's say there's not. Let's say they hired a property manager, they did everything right, but they have to get a tenant out and we go through an eviction process. If we go through that whole process and win, in Cook County at least, when you win a judgment, you get an order of possession. You have to wait 1 week before you take that order of possession to a sheriff so that that sheriff can evict your tenant. The Cook County Sheriff throughout the years, anywhere from 6 weeks to 12 weeks backlog. So
Ouch.
you've gone through a
Wow.
whole case. You've won. You've got an order of possession. You want your tenant out. Your tenant can still wait there 6 weeks to 12 weeks. Well, what
Without
can
paying
happen?
rent.
Without
Yeah.
paying rent.
And even longer
now
in the
they're
winter.
angry. You've won a lawsuit against them and you're kicking them out. They're angry. They can destroy the property. I've had a couple situations where during the process of the tenant waiting to get evicted, they've destroyed the property.
Right.
I would
So-
literally cry every day. Like, oh.
Yeah, it actually happened to my dad. My dad was
I
telling
love
me,
all
he
your
said-
dad stories, dude.
he said, "You're an attorney.
wanna
Go
meet
get
your
him out."
dad.
And I said, "Okay, I'll go get him out." I said, "But I suggest you do a cash for keys type situation." He said, "No, they haven't paid me. I'm not going to give them cash." Which
because
isn't,
you get entitled, you get emotional, and you're like,
Yeah.
It happens a lot.
I've been wrong, right? And that feeling of being wrong gets the best out of you, and so you want to prove a point. So you're like, no,
Absolutely.
it's cash for keys. No way. I'm not gonna give them money on top of the fact that they haven't paid me rent for 6 months.
especially when his son was an attorney and that was free. But it turned out in the end that it didn't make a lot of business sense. So we said, this is a business relationship, so it has to make business sense. Took a couple months to get them out. Once I got them out, they destroyed the property. Well, go back to what I said about a judgment. I went back and I got another property damage judgment against them, but I can't collect. When I went to go collect on that judgment, I froze a bank account that had $7 in it. So
Yeah.
it would have made a lot of business sense for him to upfront cash for keys this person instead of go through the process, get them upset with the fact that I evicted them, and then they still have 6 to 12 weeks. And a tenant can call the Cook County Sheriff and say, "Hey, Cook County Sheriff, how long is the wait time right now for evictions?" And they'll tell them. So a savvy tenant will know that and will work the system as best they can.
Wow.
Wait, so like I have a crazier
This is
story.
almost
We're
like a
gonna
work
one
the
up
system
everybody
101.
today, right? Let me one up your dad's story. So, during the recession, I had a client who bought this property as a short sale. So she bought the property, and in the property there was a tenant who hadn't paid rent. So the tenant said, "Fine, I'm moving out. There's a new landlord. I'm not gonna deal with this." So the person that helped that tenant move out kept the keys to the property and stayed in the property, had a mattress and a refrigerator and a gallon of milk, in the refrigerator. My client called the police, and she basically said there's somebody who's in the property that doesn't belong there, because the other tenant was like, "I'm out, I'm gone, here are your keys." And he'd returned the keys. So she went and opened the door, and there's this person that she didn't even know. So she called the police. The police got this guy out and kicked the guy out. Supposedly the guy went to the hospital. So he put a lawsuit against my client and the police, department. And then he had squatter rights. He
Yeah.
was able to
Yeah, you
stay
get-
in that
you get tenant
property
rights.
for 6 months. My client spent over $28,000 in attorney fees, and she still wasn't able to collect any rents. And then she was part of a lawsuit, the police station. I mean, I was brought in to testify. I'm like, wait, why am I being involved?
Someone broke into a house and
No, like the friend who helped the guy
Gave her the
move out
keys.
kept the keys,
Yeah.
and then the judge said, well, they have squatter rights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like crazy. Like, you have to know your rights, and it's like there are crazy attorneys. I'm not saying you're one of them, obviously,
A little crazy.
but most attorneys are crazy. No, but
Yeah.
there are attorneys out there who make a living out of suing landlords, and
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't even think the tenant got any money out of it. He pretty much just got to live there for free. But the person who got the money was actually the attorney, and they prey on people.
So what happens now is a lot of tenant rights attorneys, I call, and I'm going to probably get hate mail after I say this, I call some tenants rights attorneys the ambulance chasers of the real estate world, because they'll take a $200 or $300 fee from the tenant, and because the RLTO allows you to collect your attorney fees if you win on the RLTO, they'll go after the landlord if they have any small RLTO claim. And if they win a small claim, they can still get their attorney fees. And they know the landlord has some money because they have a property, and they'll go after the landlord for the attorney fees. But it gives a tenant almost no risk, because they're like, okay, I have a $200 attorney fee. I'll risk it for $200. They have nothing to lose. And the
And they can live for
attorneys say,
free.
I'm going to get my attorney fee eventually at the end from the landlord. So it's opened a floodgate of a lot of attorneys who will take these cases for a few $100s. Now, if these cases were $2,000, a landlord or a tenant would think twice about going after their landlord. But when it's a couple $100, they'll run that risk and say, hey, you know what? Let's roll the dice and see what happens.
That is insane. And of course, right, this particular situation had nothing to do with my client screening and doing her due diligence, but it's just to show you that there are attorneys out there that are willing to represent your tenants, and they know the system. They work the system. And so you have to know your rights. That way you protect yourself against the situation.
So I have a question, just because we're talking about different things, but like in the screening process, I always say that a big percentage of the renting market are people who are unable to buy. There's restrictions as to why they're unable to buy. How do you screen for someone who just maybe recently went through a bankruptcy or maybe just recently had a shortcoming with a foreclosure and their only option is to rent? Like, what kind of screening process are we doing for those kind of individuals?
Same thing, and you brought up a good word earlier. You said, an owner's feeling desperate. They've had a property that's been vacant for 2 months and they're really looking for money. Still don't take them. You don't have to take the guy that's had the bankruptcy. There's lots of other tenants out there. If your place is in good shape and it shows well, just like in the sales world, there's other options. There's other tenants, and it's worth the wait to wait for that good tenant. There's some other landlord out there who probably doesn't screen as well or doesn't care, and there's always a place for everyone, but it doesn't have to be your place.
Yeah. Okay. Again, run it like a business, right, and make sure that you take the best tenants so that you can avoid these issues. In the past, when the market was kind of slower, we had this issue with recession, right? Everybody lost their properties, and so you had people who were renting, but they did have bankruptcies and foreclosures in their records. We used to ask for 6 months of prepaid rents, not security deposits, but prepaid rents, because that way they are able to live out, and we had no issues with collecting rent. Sometimes it's just, financial hardships, and you have to deal with what's happening in the market. Now, I don't see this happening anymore. People are mostly working on improving their credits, but if you are in that situation, make sure you protect yourself and collect higher rents or prepay rents.
Or get a cosigner. So, a cosigner is equal in liability sense to the person on the lease when it comes to the law. So if you are going to be that nice guy who takes somebody, and I agree with Lauren, don't feel bad. I'm a nice guy, but I tell my clients all the time, don't feel bad when you're dealing with a business relationship here. Right. But if you're inclined to do it, get somebody who has a really good credit score as a cosigner. So if mom or dad or uncle has a great credit score, get somebody to cosign so you have somebody on the lease who also has good credit that you can go after if you have to go after somebody.
Okay.
Go after somebody. I know I had to call you to go after
I like
somebody.
that.
No, listen,
the attorney on the panel is
we don't like going after
you got to go
anybody.
after someone. Go after them.
We turn down so much landlord-tenant eviction business because we conflict resolve. We honestly tell people the best thing you can do is conflict resolve. Do what you can to not end up in court because of that process.
Conflict resolve. I like that term. We're going to hashtag and coin that.
But I had a client where the property got gutted. Like literally, the tenant gutted the property. They took
show up and the
everything.
properties-
Like literally, they
I
took
would die.
everything. They took fixtures. They took
Appliances.
yeah,
Can they do
literally
that?
everything.
And then you got to assume it's small claims court or whatever.
Yeah, again,
I
you
would
can
die.
you can win. You can win suits against them. But again, if you win a lawsuit, they give you a sheet of paper that says you just won X amount of dollars. Great, you got a sheet of paper that says you won X amount of dollars. Now go collect it. The collection process is a different step. And if they don't have anything for you to collect from, you're in a little bit of trouble. You just have a cute sheet of paper that says you won some money.
And you
says you have
see,
some
this
money.
is why I love Section 8 tenants, because that's an automatic deposit into a bank account, and you don't have to chase anybody for your money. So, and of course, there's different guidelines for a Section 8 tenant, not a market tenant, but, you still protect making sure you're getting your money. I have horror stories. I mean, once I had to file a restraining order against a tenant. Like, seriously.
Oh, no.
It is crazy. Like, that's why I think this topic is really important, because I seriously did.
Restraining orders.
Restraining orders, they refused to pay, and so I came, they're like, yeah, we're gonna give you the keys, and then I show up with my brother to pick up the keys. I'm like 5'7", okay, 5'0", and I show up to collect the keys, and there's like 5 people there, and they're just waiting for me, and they seriously jumped my brother and I. We had to run, and I had to seriously go and file restraining order. We were so scared. I had to sell that property. I was done.
Who would jump Carla? Like literally.
You don't understand. It was horrible.
Gotta be a degenerate.
This was pre, kids and marriage and all that jazz. That's when I was like, yeah, where's my rent? I want my rent. But again, conflict resolution. It's the best way to go. So thank you guys for sharing your best practices for screening tenants. Obviously, this is a 1-hour show, so we can't get into the ins and out of everything. We do recommend that obviously you always align yourself with an expert and that you know your rules so that you can avoid these situations. the biggest no-no, and I think the scariest part of being a landlord, and a lot of people take this, like for granted, is the security deposit. Lauren, what is your advice on that?
Don't take them.
Really? I want my money.
Yeah, no, don't take it that way. So Chicago Association of Realtors actually came out a couple of years ago and is formally advising not to take security deposits either. And so our management has followed suit there, and we advise and won't even take on clients now that have security deposits or that want to do security deposits. I know it's a concept that's been around forever, and there's actually, nationwide, they're still used pretty, widely. But in Chicago, we're advising non-refundable administrative move-in fees now instead.
Wait a minute. So after they move out, I can't find them. They've moved out. They gave me their forwarding address for me to send the security deposit. But what if there's damages that are beyond wear and tear, and they've destroyed everything, and plus they're going to owe me more than the security deposit? You mean I now have to go call Mo so I can get my money? So no to security deposits? That makes me nervous.
I agree with Lauren in Chicago. And here's the reason why. The landlord-tenant ordinance, if you've mishandled security deposits, allows the tenant to get 2 times the security deposit plus those attorney fees. When I say mishandled, there's a lot of steps you have to take with a security deposit, and it's very easy to mishandle. And it's what we call in law strict liability. So if you goof up any of those steps, and I won't go through all of them because there are a lot of them, then
another 2 hours.
Just the way you talk makes me dizzy and scared. I'm having an anxiety attack right now because he's using all these terms
I know,
liabilities.
seriously.
Like I'm in court.
So basically,
and I've done something wrong.
In layman's terms, if you goof up any of it, you're in big trouble.
Okay.
So you're liable to 2 times the security deposit plus the attorney fees. So Lauren made a good point. Take
twice the security deposit amount.
Take
That's
a move-in
crazy.
fee. Because again, Carla, you just mentioned what happens if I get to the end of the lease and they've done some damages above and beyond my security deposit. Well, good luck getting them to pay that. Again, they're going to say, I'm not paying you. So you're stuck anyways. So you got to weigh your pluses and minuses there. Do you want to take the risk of potentially being liable for 2 times the security deposit and attorney fees? Or is it better to take your move-in fee and have that mitigate your damages? Because what's your security deposit? Maybe $1,500. What can that get you?
1 month's rent.
What is that? Yeah, 1 month's rent. What is that going to get you? Maybe paint.
Right, because once you damage floor, you can't just clean that spot or fix that hardwood floor in that corner. You have to redo the entire floor or area.
A great example. We had a tenant in our earlier days when we still did deposits that had a deposit. And, we're a management company, so we would follow the deposit law very carefully and follow all those steps. And we get that argument a lot. You're a management company. Why can't you just take the deposit and handle it properly? So we installed brand new carpet in this apartment, and the tenants move out. They lived there 1 year, and the carpet is a new color. It's black and blues and etc. And it's not even attached to the ground in some places anymore. We attempt to clean it.
1 year of residency?
1 year. Attempt to clean it. Can't get it clean. And so we're like, we're going to replace it.
frat boys moved in.
Yeah. So we charge them for the replacement of the carpet and do it the proper way with all the invoicing and everything. And they get an attorney involved, and the attorney is arguing it's normal wear and tear.
Wow.
So even when, we had pictures of before and after of the carpet and we had done everything right with the deposit, you still have a fight, and they're still getting attorneys involved. And it's never worth, he hasn't mentioned yet all those attorney fees that you have to deal with.
Sure.
He says it with a straight face. Hey, I know what I'm worth.
It's good to have an attorney friend.
She's absolutely right. If you're going to take a security deposit in Chicago, if you're outside of Chicago, this landlord-tenant ordinance doesn't apply. Although a lot of collar cities are now mirroring the Chicago landlord-tenant ordinance. So you have to, even if you're outside of Chicago, read up on what's happening. There's some tough ones. Evanston's tough. There's a lot of tough collar cities that kind of mimic the landlord-tenant ordinance. But yes, at the end of it, if they go and hire an attorney, you have to hire an attorney. So
and wait, before you go into them hiring an attorney, they can call 311 and go through the tenant dispute hotline, and they can basically turn in a landlord, and they can get free legal services. And so they get represented for free, and then they get you for twice the security deposit plus legal fees. So it's not really a landlord state, as they say, right?
City.
Definitely not a landlord
city.
And if you're going to take a security deposit, read the landlord-tenant ordinance. It's boring. If you can't fall asleep one night, read it. It'll put you to sleep. But if you're going to have a tenant and you want to take a security deposit, either hire a property manager who knows what they're doing with
Or an
your security
attorney.
deposit, or an attorney, or
I
call
love
us.
how these
Now,
two
are
are
there
doing
limitations
it.
to how much you can charge, like that administration move-in fee or anything like that? Do you have any limitations as to what you can actually charge up front?
Most of the law is the reasonableness standard. Now, Lauren can probably
$15,000.
talk to this. If you charge too much, they're probably not going to rent your place. They'll go somewhere else. So you got to keep it reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah, we've done, because we do some high-end single-family homes where it gets kind of complicated. You know, someone's paying $10,000 a month in rent. You know, a $300 move-in fee doesn't really seem fair.
Can you give them my card and say they should buy something?
Yeah.
Like $10,000.
$10,000
Like,
rent?
serious.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of times they're like building something or they're here short-term for international work.
I
you
got
get
you,
really
Lauren.
interesting stories.
Jesus. You got to like break my heart all the time.
But yeah, we'll do up to 20% of 1 month's rent as a
Wow.
move-in fee on those type of properties.
Okay.
And it's really been amazing, you know, and from every property, from the $1,200 a month property to the $10,000 a month property, how little kickback we're getting on the move-in fees because it is less money. You know, when you're paying first month's rent and a full month's rent deposit up front, that's a lot of cash for tenants. And so they kind of appreciate that the move-in fee is less cash up front.
Yeah, no. And I used to remember a lot of people. I remember I had a couple clients that were landlords, and a lot of tenants sometimes use that security deposit as like their last month's rent or something like that, where they just didn't pay
They
the
think
last
they don't
month's
have to
rent
pay, yeah.
and said you could just keep the security deposit. So sometimes it actually ended up coming back and
Wait,
bite
I
them.
heard you can't do that, right? You can't use the security deposit as last month's rent, and also you have to maintain that amount in a non-commingling account, and so you have to replenish that. So you can't really use that for rent.
So one of the things is when you get a security, one of the rules is when you get a security deposit, it has to go in a separate interest-bearing account. It can't be commingled with the rent checks, and it has.
So I
to
can't go
stay
shopping
there.
with that money.
You cannot
No.
go shopping. With
Okay.
it. No purses with the security deposit money.
Purses. I'm talking about trips. Like, oh, I got an extra $1,500.
Go to Mexico.
There's a lot of rules and regulations, so you just read the landlord-tenant ordinance or hire somebody who can give you the steps. But it does have to be in a separate interest-bearing account, and you have to pay interest out at the end of the year. That's a very commonly missed step.
The interest?
Somebody will just
So wait,
return
the
the security
interest-
deposit, but not the interest.
Like
So
a
you
5-cent
actually-
check you have
Really?
to mail out.
It's seriously
I
like
didn't know that.
nothing, like the
It's nothing.
percentage that you're going to
This is
give
pretty
them,
cool.
but
Yeah.
just missing that, right?
Missing that, you're liable under the landlord-tenant ordinance.
Or just missing the address of where you're going to hold this
bank
the security
address. You have to have
deposit.
the
You have
bank
to
address
bank.
on
So
the
you
bank,
have to make
yeah.
sure that you have a lease that includes all this stuff, because if
Yes.
it doesn't, you're breaking rules. And then, you know, you try to sue this person because they're moved out, or, you know, they broke their lease. You can't, because you broke the rule first. So again, you have to align yourself with somebody who knows what they're doing and make sure that you do it up front versus later, because then, you know, once you're later, you're probably in litigation. One of the things that I recommend is also doing the move-in inspection, right? I'm sure you do that.
Yep, yep.
In the form of a video also, because sometimes we forget, and I like to tell people, like, listen, we're your leasing agents now, but we may not be your leasing agents when you move out. And so you have to make sure that you protect yourself as a tenant and go through the, you know, the property, inspect it. And then as a landlord, we issue a move-in inspection sheet and also a move-out list of like the costs associated with any repairs or any damages. That way you are having these conversations up front. And so even for cleaning services, we're like, okay, it's going to cost you like $50 an hour. Is it really going to cost $50 an hour? Maybe not. But this is to, you know, make you not do it, because you're going to get into these situations where tenants leave this dirty kitchen, dirty stove, and then you're having to deal with it later. What do you do, Lauren?
Yeah, we do move-in and move-out inspections. It's become a little less relevant if you don't have deposits, just because you have that move-in fee, and you know usually it's at least $300, and that's covering your cleaning and some painting touch-ups. So you can be a little less specific about these are the charges for certain things, because that's the idea of the move-in fee,
Right.
which kind of makes your life easier too in that sense. It's great. But we do we do the inspections because if there is damage beyond the move-in fee, our lease still says that they're responsible for that damage. You know, we had someone who had a puppy who decided to chew up all the baseboards in a unit, and the move-in fee wasn't going to cover that. And, you know, it was well-screened tenants, so they were good tenants who actually paid to, you know, get that damage fixed. But that's why those inspections are important. And it also helps make sure the unit's in good shape for the next tenant, because you want to set a good expectation with the next tenant too.
It's great.
Lots of information.
Like
It's kind of scary. Security deposits, I'm joking around, but yeah, mostly we always recommend as well not to take them. I know people get like, I just want to be certain that nothing's going to happen. I want to collect my rent, and I want to do prepay rent, and I want to do last month's rent. I mean, there's no way you could protect yourself. You also have to be fair with your tenants. Obviously, you're going to run out of tenants.
Yeah,
and we all kind of sound like the Grim Reaper right now, but
We are, 'cause we've been through it.
9 out of 10 times, you're going to have a great tenant that's not going to destroy anything. And if you are upfront with them and have done your due diligence and done your credit check and done your background check, 9 out of 10 times, nothing's going to go wrong. But you have to prepare yourself in case something does go wrong. So.
In my last situation, selling a property in Logan Square, my client, it's like, well, they're my friends, and I never thought to do this because they're friends. And then we were trying to sell the property. We had no access to the property. It was just a crazy relationship. So initially, it always starts great. You're always best friends, but towards the end, you want to avoid. We want to have it all in writing, and you want to make sure that you're knowledgeable about this landlord-tenant ordinance summary and read it. Especially if this is their first time. And, we initially started thinking about the show as we're getting a lot of people selling now. And they're relocating, and some people just decide they don't want to sell it because there's not enough equity in the property, and they're relocating because of jobs. Or some people are just going to move into another property because they need a larger space, and so they're made to become a landlord, and sometimes they never wanted to be a landlord. This is just a situation that kind of fell in their lap. So this show is for you. Want to make sure that you are prepared and that you again align yourself with experts. So after security deposit, I think the biggest overall above security deposits, it's the lack of payment. Like, how do you go around collecting your rent once they just decided they're not going to pay you rent?
Yeah, well, we talked a little bit earlier. We both love cash for keys. We love to avoid that eviction process whenever possible because the length of the actual court process, the length of waiting for the sheriff, and then also paying those attorneys. And so we both agreed on recommending to try to negotiate something with the tenant to get them move out, sign an agreement, and hand you keys. And that may mean
cash for keys,
paying them $500, and even though you really don't want to because they owe you, $5,000.
It's a
so
tough
righteous.
pill to swallow. Every time I suggest that on the phone when somebody calls me when I'm an attorney on one of these,
especially your
they
dad.
didn't pay me. My dad was the most extreme version of that. They didn't pay me, and you want me to give them money to leave, and then we break down the business decision of it. Well, if they're not paying you now, the next couple months in litigation, they're not going to pay you, but you're still paying me to go after them. And then once I win, if they have no counterclaims and you've done nothing wrong, you still have to wait for the sheriff to evict your person. So you could be relisting this place and getting rent every single month instead of just waiting while somebody's not paying you rent and occupying your place. Right. It is a tough pill to swallow, but it is my suggestion always the first step is to do that. We also spoke about potentially sending a 5-day notice. So if somebody stops paying, you can send them a 5-day notice to make a payment or that you're going to terminate their lease. It's the 5-day notice is the term of art for it.
So here,
sometimes
this is
that
where it
scares
gets
people.
this is where it gets really complicated, right? Because a lot of landlords, you're busy, you're taking care of your family, so you're forgetting about this property, and your tenant hasn't paid you, and so they're waiting 1 month, and they're like, oh, we're gonna pay you next month, and they wait the second month, and then you get really emotional. You're like, okay, I'm going to avoid eviction because my attorney and my realtor told us to avoid eviction as much as possible, so we're gonna let them write out another 3 months. But then eventually they're like, okay, enough is enough. We're 4th month and no rent. We're going to issue that 5-day notice, right? And the tenant gives you maybe gives you 1 month of the rent and says still owes you.
I would not, if they're not paying the whole amount of rent, I wouldn't accept it. Now, one of the things I always tell people is if you reach out to them after the 5-day notice and tell them, listen, I want to make this work. I want you to leave and me to be able to rent this place out. Let's figure something out, conflict resolve. That typically works because you got to tell them the other option is if you're not going to do that and I have to file suit, I'm going to keep going. I always tell people this when I call them. I'll call a tenant on behalf of my client sometimes and come from a place of conflict resolution. Hey, tenant, I've been hired to evict you. I don't want to have to do that. He's the muscle. Yeah, in a sense, I don't want to have to do that to you. But if I'm forced to go through that process, I'm going to go for it the whole way. Once I get a judgment against you, I can freeze your accounts. I can, it's going to go against your credit.
That,
you can.
Yeah.
So once you have a judgment, you do what's called a citation to discover assets. You can freeze accounts and stuff. So I let them know I don't want to do that stuff to you. So let's conflict resolve. And a lot of times that gets them thinking, well, yes, I have tenant rights, but I also don't want to have to go through this process where I've been sued and somebody has a judgment against me. Because a judgment, even if you don't collect on it, and I was saying before, it's worth a sheet of paper it's written on, it accrues at 9% interest, statutory interest in our state. So I let them know that, and then I bring it back with a, hey, but let's conflict resolve. I let them know what can happen to them if I sue them, but let's conflict resolve. Because again, the name of the game is conflict resolution because it makes good business sense.
But at that point, they're warned. They know that you know
They're
what you're
warned.
talking about, and so they don't think that they're gonna, one up
Right.
the landlord. Lori, I mean, how many properties do you manage now?
We manage close to 800 units.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
We're busy.
Wow, that's a lot of relationships to manage. 800 units.
800
Yeah,
units.
yeah.
Wow,
That's
throughout
amazing.
Chicago or just
Chicago
like
and Evanston now.
Chicago and
Wow.
Evanston.
Yeah.
you're a busy girl.
Yes, yeah.
So what would you say is kind of like the point of no return when you're like, okay, 2 months done, 3 months, no rent? At what point do you issue that 5-day notice?
Yeah, I was actually just going to tell you. You just said you waited 4 months before going after a tenant. And it's another thing where they always have a story. You know, they're expecting their first child. They got laid off, but they're expecting that unemployment check. I could have a whole show on the stories that we've gotten from tenants and why they can't pay rent.
Lori
Right.
Tales, like taxi tales, you have your own tales.
Yeah. But don't be that nice guy again. I mean, and it's not, I'm a nice person too, but
I promise, I'm really, really
It's
nice.
like a really nice.
We're going to get
except
so much hate mail.
I'm a
going
landlord.
I don't know, Mo. You're
but
an
it's
attorney,
a business,
so.
you know, and if someone owed your business money, you wouldn't let it sit for 4 months.
No, absolutely.
And the problem with letting it sit for 4 months is then if you're starting the eviction at that point, serving them is hard. You have to actually hand them a piece of paper. You can't just slide it under a door. And then the court process can take a while, and then waiting on the sheriff. So you could be at a year, you know, where you're not getting any rent if you wait 4 months before you start that process.
Wow, that's scary.
So we're after 30 days. And we evaluated a little bit where if the tenant has called us ahead of time, let us know what's happening, let us know when we're going to be expecting it. That's usually a little bit different scenario than the tenant who's not picking up his phone, who's not responding to emails. And, you know, this is the third time they've paid late, or, you know, it's you're past 30 days, you're past 45 days, get moving on it right away.
Wow, that's great advice. Because I know we get, excuse me, clients who call in and say, well, you know, I took their money, and at this point you have to start again, right? Reissue, because now that you've given them an opportunity to stay there for another 30 days just because you did collect that rent, even if it was half rent, right? Even if it was a third of the rent amount. Because the 5-day notice is to initiate the eviction process, right? So you issue a 5-day notice, and then you issue the 30-day. How does it go with respect to notices?
So typically you issue a 5-day notice when there's non-payment. So
Okay.
if there's non-payment, it's a 5-day notice.
Okay.
Most of the time, if somebody's going to give a partial payment, I tell people don't accept that, continue forward. Throughout the lawsuit itself, if you go to an eviction, you can do a motion to force them to continue to pay rent. Now, will they in practice continue to pay rent? Probably not. You'll get an order from the judge that says tenant has to keep paying rent throughout this process. So I tell them don't take a partial payment, go through that. But chances are if somebody's behind 2 months, 3 months, they give you a partial payment, they're already underwater on rent. It's going to be very hard for them to catch up the full amount and then start making continuous timely payments. So my recommendation is if you're going to go forward with the actual eviction process, and you've done the 5-day and you're not going to conflict resolve, then don't take partial payments.
Right. It's an emotional thing. And I mean, you run the numbers up front, so you know what their debt to income ratios are. You know how much debt they're carrying and whether they can go ahead and catch up or not, unless they're going to win or get a lump sum of money. You know, if they're unemployed for some time, you have to protect your assets, right? You have to protect your business, and you have to run it like a business. And you know, we're being like harsh because the process is very harsh. But at the beginning of the, you know, when you do the screening and you set up the relationship, I always bring in a basket with wine and then some cleaning supplies. And we set the tone for what's going to be a great relationship moving forward, a great business relationship. I'm not there to become best friends with you, because then they're going to be like, oh, Carla, guess what? You know, like I couldn't get paid, or I didn't get child support money this month. Like I'm being rude, but you know, that's what happens. People have a lot of excuses, and you can't call your mortgage company and say, hey, guess what? My tenant didn't pay me rent, because you know
What
that's
about
not
insurance?
how it works.
I've seen a lot of like rent loss coverage policies and stuff like that. Insurances. Is that something that you guys see on like the asset management side?
Yeah, we're not seeing a lot of owners deal with those. And I think, you know, Chicago, again, is kind of a tough market for some of that to work.
Okay.
Just because of the way the landlord-tenant ordinance is written. You do see it more nationwide, though.
Yeah.
Wait, walk me through this. I've never heard of that.
So like I do lending in all 50 states. So I've noticed like a lot of the times when I'm doing like investment property refinances or, you know, purchases like that, some insurance companies will actually have rent loss coverage included in their insurance policy. So in the event that they ever have a tenant where maybe the property is just vacant or maybe they're not receiving the rent, the insurance will actually cover a certain period. In certain cases, they have like a 6-month policy to a 12-month policy maximum. Well, they'll actually pay for for the actual rent that they're not receiving.
That sounds like a cool deal, right?
Yeah, we see it like if there's like a fire or a flood and the tenant can't live there and you're losing rent because of that the
Okay.
insurance would cover it. But I've never seen a policy in Chicago where a tenant's not paying and the insurance is going to cover it. There is eviction insurance too that I've seen on a nationwide basis.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never seen it in Chicago.
In Chicago.
either.
Okay.
Look at you,
I gotta
Javier.
look into it.
But I know
Insurance.
it's
I've
out.
seen- no,
I know
I've
it's out
definitely
there.
seen
He's
that.
right.
No,
it's
I've
out
definitely
there.
seen
but
that.
I in practice, you haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. In Chicago.
Just because
Yeah,
like Fannie
Lauren
Mae
has.
and Freddie Mac actually made it one of the requirements for that to be on there for investment properties.
Oh, really? For people
Yeah.
that have the insurance?
Yeah.
Makes
But
sense.
I just got to take a look at the city of Chicago. Maybe there's specific ordinances that.
Well, going
make
back to what we said earlier about, people being having to get stuck with that landlord role, maybe that you didn't ask for it, maybe you didn't buy it just to become a landlord, or maybe you're buying a property and we've been advising you to rent out the second unit, and then help subsidize that mortgage payment. This is the information that you want to take notes on. And obviously you can reach our guests and email us at info@marketoverdrive.com. Towards the end of the show, we're going to give you their contact information so you can call them directly. So take it to the next level, right? Like, how do you handle a sale? Like, if you're decided, you know what, enough is enough, I'm done. There is some equity in the property. I want to sell my property. Like, how do you handle that, Lauren?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit too, but you like to become friends with the tenants. The realtor
I just
should want
thought
to
I
become
said
friends
do
with
not
the
become
tenants.
best friends with the tenants.
Not best friends, but be nice.
Play nice, Carla.
Yeah, I mean, because
BFFing.
the realtor's going to want to get in there a lot for
Let me
showings.
go hang out with you on the
and-
weekends. Come over to your, barbecue party. Hey.
But you also want it to show well, which is hard when there's a tenant in there and you have tenant furniture. And so one thing we're regularly telling tenants is, hey, the sooner we get this under contract, the sooner we don't have to be in your apartment anymore. Those Saturday showings and open houses can stop. So they're incentivized to keep it clean too, because they don't want you in there all the time. So it is a two-way street, and kind of reminding them of that pretty frequently helps. And when they're really frustrated, like, I worked the night shift last night and now you're doing an open house during the day. We'll bring them a Starbucks gift card or some donuts to
I
kind of
like
thank
you. You're
them.
nice.
And,
You're
yeah.
a good landlady.
Now, do those tenant rights, like let's say that they have an open lease, right? And they're maybe have 3 or 4 months remaining on that lease and it's going to be a change of ownership. Is there any differences with the
Explain
change of
open
ownership?
lease. What do you mean by that?
Right. So, like, let's say you have a lease, you have a property, it's fully leased, and now you're selling it to someone who's probably going to do a primary residence occupancy on one of those units or something like that. Do any of those restrictions regarding to that lease that they were tied to with the previous owner transfer over now to the new owner?
Sure. Yes, they do. And if you're are you saying somebody would occupy it then? So you have to get the tenant out.
Right.
Oh, like to
Yeah,
break
yeah,
the lease
so-
or terminate the lease?
You would have to do something again to make the tenant who's in there want to leave. So give them some sort of cash to be able to terminate the lease early, because that lease for 12 months stays for 12 months. If you want to sell on month 6, you can't just tell a tenant you
Wait,
gotta
can they
go.
deny that? Can they say, I'm not going to move out. I'm not going to, you
Yeah.
can't buy me out?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Shut up. Really?
Yeah, if you
Yeah.
sell it, you can't just say, "Hey, listen, you got to go now." You
lease
have to keep
stays.
them
The
the
lease
whole
stays.
lease term.
Now, what if there's only like 90 days remaining on that lease after I take ownership of that property? And let's say at that point in time, they don't want to vacate the property.
So
I, as a new owner,
after the
would
90
I
days
still
of-
have to go through like the whole eviction process and
Yes.
everything else as opposed to
Yes.
just really? Okay.
Now, Lauren said something that I think is really wise. Build a nice relationship with them when you're about to list a property. I do the same thing when I'm a realtor. I'll take them a gift of some sort. I'll call them. I'll tell them, hey, listen, a realtor will always be accompanying somebody. I'll make them feel comfortable with the entire process so that they work with us. They'll do
Yeah.
a 24-hour notice instead of a 48, because technically you have to give them 48 hours notice before you do a showing. But in practice in real estate, that's hard to do. We want 24 hours notice or sooner. So build a really good relationship with that tenant and let them know that you're going to respect their privacy. And if there's a day that they're sick. So I just had a situation where the tenant was great the whole time and said, listen, I came down with the flu. Next 3 days, please cancel the showings. I said, no problem. I didn't fight them on that. And sure enough, day 3, she said, I'm feeling better if you still want to do any showings today. So just build a good relationship with the person, and it's going to make it a lot
A lot
smoother.
smoother.
For
sailing.
sure. Because once
Like
it gets to the other side where they're upset at you, then it's hard to sell property. As realtors, and I know you're putting on your realtor hat right now, it is so hard, let me tell you. Like they won't give you access. They can deny access, right?
Well, you got to give them 48 hours notice.
What
so
if
they
I
can
give them
make it
48-hour
difficult.
notice? If they are saying we don't want to do this, can they just say we're not going to do this?
No,
No,
technically,
technically no.
But
But
do you want a showing with someone blocking the door? Or like
I have a good story. I
That's-
had one
Please
in a
do
condo.
share because
Yeah.
I'm like embarrassed to tell mine. Like
And
it's a nightmare.
He was just difficult, and what he would do is he would literally leave a trail of underwear in the hallway. I'm not kidding you. He would have all of his dirty laundry. It's almost like he picked out underwear, and he would leave underwear all over the place. It's like he made a complete mess every time we went in there. And one time I came in, and he was just standing in his boxers in the kitchen and wouldn't leave. And he
you
let us do the
serious?
showing, but he just stood there in his boxers and stared at us, which is
Did
the
you
most
sell
awkward
the
thing.
That
property?
is
But
amazing.
That must
Making
have
it
sold the
impossible
property.
to sell the place.
Yeah. Did you
So,
sell it?
Eventually.
There we go.
Oh, it's
money
crazy.
time
This is
lapse.
ridiculous.
But yeah, make it so that it's smooth. It's smooth sailing situation. If you irritate them, it's not that they can deny you access, but they can make things a little bit more difficult for you.
It
Yeah,
makes it difficult.
absolutely.
And of course, ask your realtor, right? This is where we talk about real estate practices. What is the best marketing strategy if you're going to be selling a property? I always go back to listing and pricing, right? You have to create value for that prospective buyer. So one way to create value is through pricing. Obviously, if the conditions is not going to be in the best light because these tenants are going to keep the property dirty, then just price it right and then do like a 1 week in open house type of showing. But it's a strategy that you have to be very careful with because obviously no one wants to leave money on the table, but it allows for a better relationship with the tenant. Everybody understands that you're going to have a 1 day open house, 12 to 2, or maybe you'll do 3 nights of the week or 3 evenings because buyers look at properties in the evening. So you identify those key dates. That way you're not like an open call where you're basically saying, okay, every 48 hours. So I always get house. So we stipulate the dates that we're going to do evenings and then 1 weekend so that I can do an open house. So we stipulate the dates that we're going to do evenings and then 1 weekend so that I can do an open house. So we stipulate the dates that we're going to be in the property. It makes it easier for other agents as well because now they know when they can schedule the showings. Unfortunately, you do have agents that are working with buyers who are coming from other states and they're like, we're only here for this weekend. We have to get in. And that kind of messes up the strategy because you can't access the property. You've already stipulated the dates. But going back to the initial strategy of pricing right and then doing that 1 day open house, it makes it for a better relationship. You get the property under contract. And then one thing that really concerns me though is the fact that appraisal and then you're done. The one thing that really concerns me though is the fact that if you have a tenant in place and they don't have to move out, even if you offer them to buy them out of their contract, that's conflicting for a lot of people who need to sell and the next buyer is going to want to occupy that property. Is there anything that they can do?
Raise your offer to them. I mean, there's always a point where they're going to agree to vacate. And what I like to tell my clients is give them enough notice. So control your closing with your next buyer for maybe 60 days. So tell your tenant, hey tenant, I'm going to work something out with you. We'll conflict resolve. We'll give you X amount of dollars and I'll give you 60 days to get out of this lease. So you have 60 days to then go and find something else. So I'll give you notice that the sale's happening and 60 days from there, I would ask that you move out. Don't make them move out in 30 days and they're scrambling and trying to find a place last minute. But I feel like if you butter up the terms and make them a little bit better and more fair for them, they'll typically accept a reasonable solution.
Now, if you agree to something of an offer like that, and let's say the 60 days are up, they are unable to find a place, and all of a sudden it just steamrolls into issues. Even if you have an agreement in place, you still have to go through the whole...
Anytime you need to get... The easiest way to put it is anytime you need to get somebody out of your property, you're
You're still going to have to go through that.
And it's
so
not
regardless of what terms or agreements or anything like that. So that's something that's very important because I think that a lot of times some people like the cash for keys, right? You could essentially make an agreement with someone, hand over some money, and then all of a sudden if they change their mind...
You hand the money when you get the keys.
Exactly.
So it's like that. Like, are we going
I was
Facebook
like,
Live? Are we going to do a
Yeah.
Facebook Live? Like, okay, everyone, look, here's
Literally,
cash for
it's
keys.
Literally. And you're changing
Really?
the locks as soon as you've got the keys, right? You
Yep.
guys will change
Is
the
that
locks.
goodness.
literally how that
This
works?
is crazy.
Keys equal
I
possession.
like that.
So you want the
Yes.
keys.
Wow.
Same time.
We
You're
could
not
make
giving
like
them a
we could
cashier's
make
check
like
and then
a-
knocking on the door.
Make
and
a
saying,
reality
"Please
show out
leave."
of this.
Seriously. All
Cash
right,
for
guys,
keys.
we're ending our show now, and we need to wrap it up. Give us your best practices or best advice. Lauren, you want to go ahead first?
Yeah, well, obviously, hire an expert, whether that be an attorney or a property management company. It's very hard, especially in the city of Chicago, to be a landlord on your own. And if you are going to be a landlord on your own, read the laws carefully. Even meet with an attorney for an hour to learn some of the laws before you start doing it on your own, just to protect yourself a lot.
Cool. Mr. Mo.
I agree. Just be a knowledgeable landlord. Hire somebody who's professional. We don't charge to talk to people to teach them what they should be doing. We don't charge for that. Mitigate the potential for issues. So do all the right stuff under the landlord-tenant ordinance. So if there is a situation where you do have to conflict resolved or evict, you're in a better standing than you would be if you've made a ton of mistakes. So do everything right up front so that if, God forbid, that 1 out of 10 situation happens where you have a bad tenant, you're in the best position you can be going forward.
Awesome. You heard it on Market Overdrive. He's giving free legal advice. Call in. Your first call is free. But where can someone reach you, Mo?
Where can someone reach me? You can call us at the law firm, 312-224-1719. You can call me on my cell phone, 847-431-6222. I have my cell phone on me at all times. All of our clients get our cell phone numbers at the firm.
I know.
So that's the easiest way to reach me.
That's
You're
awesome.
on speed dial, Mo. You're on speed dial. Your office is great, and we love you. We appreciate you.
Thank you
And
so
Tim as
much.
well. Tim, I know that you're at dentist appointment. You were handed
Tim
an
is a rock.
invitation, and
Love
you
you,
said no to
Tim.
Carla,
Said
but
no.
you sent us your very best. Again, say that number because I sort of interrupted
It's
you.
847-431-6222. Thanks for
And
having us on.
Awesome.
Of course. Ms. Lauren, 800 units and counting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where can someone reach
That's
you?
impressive.
Obviously, you're very knowledgeable about the process.
Yeah, so Owl Management's at 773-819-0446, or you can also email us at info@owlmanagement.com.
Love it. Javier, any advice?
Well, I learned not to take security deposits. That's for sure. You know, definitely, I would say take a look at some of the tenancy ordinances, especially with the city of Chicago. Do your due diligence. I would say the top 3 things for you to do when you're screening for a potential tenant: pull credit, verify income, and get some form of references in regards to the previous landlord history or who they may have rented from. Definitely, I would say, you know, one of those things with renting, at the end of the day, you know, the long-term goal is always going to be to own a home and to be able to purchase. But at some point in time, we have limitations in regards to down payment or maybe credit scores and things like that. So always keep that in mind, that the long-term goal is to buy a home. But if you are going to be buying a home and you are going to be renting out, make sure you're doing your due diligence and know exactly the ins and outs of what you can and cannot do before you put yourself in a situation where you might be stuck in a 6 to 12-month litigation trying to get a tenant out of your property.
And that's exactly what we want to avoid. And that's why here at Market Overdrive, we want to have topics to elevate your real estate IQ. So if you have any questions about anything that's happening in your life, real estate related, give us a call or email us at info@marketoverdrive.com. And remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and no LinkedIn, right? We're getting Snapchat. I think we need to get with the
Snapchat?
times.
Are we?
Yes, we
That's
have
good.
to. Lucero, we have.
So we got
we have
Pinterest,
it.
YouTube, we got it. Awesome.
I'm so old. I don't even know that we have Snap. So where is Nick? Officially, I'm done asking for Nick.
Nick, I don't know. He's going to be making a pretty big splash when he gets back
I
too,
hope
right?
not. Oh,
Are we going to
gosh.
have
you build the momentum of no
pyrotechnics and
Nick, and
stuff
it's
like
been
that in
kind
the
of quiet,
background?
and all of a sudden he comes back and it's like, oh, craziness again. Anyway, officially we miss you, so hurry up.
Hurry up, Nick.
Thank
Amber
you
alert.
again for watching and hanging out with us again. We're here live every Wednesday at 10 a.m. WGN Studios. And remember to follow us and share this information with anyone you know that may need it. You can reach out to us, of course. I have access to contracts and leases, and of course that landlord-tenant ordinance summary if you need it.